Hello, Debbie. What an honor. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation for the Creative Insider.
My pleasure, Georgie. Really happy to be here.
Um, I was doing a lot of research since we settled this date because we are a relatively new podcast, just a year and a half, and we interview creatives from different fields at different levels of their career. And you're one of the most famous guests that we have had over the podcast.
Thank you.
And it's harder to interview people like you that have done so many podcasts for so long time, because it's hard. We try to be insiders, so we try to do interesting questions, and we wanted to try to cover some topics that we have found interesting, or that maybe you haven't covered yet. We'll try. I'll try my best. I hope you have fun. And yeah, first of all, you're like such a big personality, such a super strong personality, because I've been listening a lot, I've read a lot, and I always try to start from the beginning. And you have mentioned in many interviews and in many public speeches that you have had a very hard childhood and a very hard, so to say, younghood in your life, and you have come through, and you've come through so strong and so powerful, and so I would say something like relentless. And I'm wondering, how did you face your college years and then joining a career with this very hard private life? How you kept your focus and the good spirit and the motivation to be so good at what you do professionally?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I just keep trying. I just want so much for this sort of one precious life we have, that I just do whatever I can to make it something as meaningful as possible.
Yeah, and you have been also very, very active, also in different fields. Like you're an author, you have written, now it's out, your latest book, your seventh book, Why Design Matters. We have unfortunately managed to have it yet, because in Europe it's still on pre-order. It's not like being delivered yet. You have
it's actually on pre-order for everybody, because it's been delayed because of COVID. So now it won't be out until February.
Yeah, we are looking to read it, and also your podcast, and your teaching. You're an educator. You've been into brand identity. How did you manage to get so good at this, so many different fields, and so challenges in your life?
I think just practice, just practice at all the things that I love. And I think that for me, trying to make meaning out of what I had been through and not allow it to prevent me from having a life that I felt proud of was a big part of what drove me and drives me still.
I've on some of the podcasts, you said that at some point you realized, so you have a major in, as if I'm not wrong, and then you have pursued a designer life. One of the, like, you were also wondering through the beginnings of your career what you should do and where you should go, and you mentioned that one very important thing for you was to live in Manhattan. And at some point, you were even considering sacrificing your aspiration for doing a job like an artist or a writer, because that's very uncertain from the financial point of view. Why was so important to live in Manhattan more than anything else? How did you figure this out? Like, because also you mentioned you were fascinated from Manhattan also as a kid, because you're a Brooklyn kid. So why was so important Manhattan?
That's a great question, Georgie. I think that, I was born in Brooklyn. I then moved to Queens, Howard Beach, Queens, and I lived there until third grade. And then moved to Staten Island and lived there for almost 3 years. And then went to junior high school and high school on Long Island. And at that point, my parents had gotten divorced. I didn't see my dad for a long time, but when I began to again, he had moved to Manhattan. And I thought it was and I hadn't spent a lot of time there prior. So this was my first experience as a sort of junior high school kid, and felt that it was the most vibrant, exciting, energetic, diverse, non-judgmental, artistic place I'd ever seen and ever experienced. And so I just at that point felt like a sense of serendipity and kinship. Also, my dad's girlfriend lived in Manhattan, and I saw her as one of the first independent, free-thinking, exciting women I had come across. And so I wanted very much to emulate the kind of life that she had at that time. She lived in a brownstone, and she lived on the top floor, and it all felt so foreign and yet familiar at the same time.
Yeah, and also like I like the idea that you were like, okay, let's not do art and literature directly. Let's become a designer, which is like a more like sort of financially safe job or safe field. And that was so interesting for me because you had on one side this sort of some fear of not being financially independent or financially free, so to say. But on the other side, you weren't directly, I think, educated as a designer, but you decided to work as a designer. And how do you start to work as a designer without having an education in design? Because I work as an architect in my field. It's impossible to go to an architectural office and say, hey, let me just try out. And they'll be like, yes, no, it doesn't work. And I wonder, how did you do it in design? Like, it's amazing.
Well, I didn't have a formal education, but I did have an opportunity to sort of learn on the job when I was in college. When I was in college in my senior year, I became the arts and features editor of my student newspaper. And as part of the responsibilities of the editor, you needed to be able to, what was then called, put the paper together. And that meant do all of the drafting work, all the layout, the paste up, the art direction, everything in preparation for the paper to be published. And so not only did I hire the writers and come up with the concepts for the issues and edit the work, I also, along with the team of people that I was working with, was responsible to make the paper, to create the paper visually. And so I learned all of the old school technology. I was working on CompuGraphic machines and typographic machines and stat cameras, and used the wax machines, and was working with T-squares on drafting tables, and was very lucky that I had this experience because it allowed me to have one marketable skill when I graduated. I graduated with a degree in literature. So, unless I was going to be reading for a living, there wasn't that much that I could do. And so this gave me an opportunity to have a portfolio. This gave me an opportunity to be able to sell my services as a paste up and layout designer, or paste up and layout artist, as they were called. And that's what I did. I got my very first job working at a cable magazine. And in the early 80s, cable was all the rage, the big innovation technologically, and got hired for $6 an hour doing sort of old school, basic layout, paste up, and magazine prep.
And I'm wondering another point of your beginning, so to say. You've mentioned in some interviews, I think it was on the Tim Ferriss show, that also one of your first gigs or like freelance gigs was to create the image of Hot 97, which was one of the first hip hop radios, if I'm not wrong, in New York. And like, was that also the first time that sort of you got in touch more with the audio world, where that's also part of your life, kind of like, was there any connection between the Hot 97 identity design job that you had and future podcasting?
No, this was so much earlier. I hung out at the college radio station when I was when I was a student, and was friends with all the folks that worked there. And we were a little posse. I didn't DJ my own radio show, but I often participated on the sidelines. So I didn't really have any technical radio experience at all. My work with Hot 97 was well before podcasting, well before, like 10 years, 12 years before. This was in the early 90s, and I was hired to work with Rocco McRae and Judy Ellis to reposition the radio station from what was a dance music radio station, like one of hundreds of others in the United States, to the world's first ever hip hop and R&B radio station. And so that was super, super exciting, and was really one of the great experiences of my career, to be able to see how that happened. And I worked with Hot 97 for basically the entire time that Rocco McRae was there. And that was from, I believe, 1992 until 2004. And then, ironically, in 2004 was when I was contacted by Voice America to start my online radio show, but they didn't have any connection whatsoever. The podcast, as it is now, really was born as an online live radio show. And then I moved it pretty quickly online to a podcast, but it wasn't intended to be that way at that time.
Yeah, and also you have said that in the beginning, when you got this opportunity to start the show, you had actually to pay for your time on air. And as somebody that's now in a probably way earlier stage in podcasting, and when it's now getting quite obvious to start a podcast, I was wondering, what was your vision for Design Matters? Was it your way to become, I don't know, a design entertaining show, or to speak to other designers, or to bring design to the man of the street and sort of educate everybody about design? What was your vision back then to start a show about design?
Georgi, I love that you're giving me credit for even having a vision. Thank you for that. I didn't really have a vision for what I was doing, because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. At the time, I was really immersed in the world of branding. I had, for the really first time in my life, aside from Hot 97, which was a very big group effort, felt like I had lost my independent creative spirit. Everything I was doing was commercial. Everything I was doing was about a return on an investment and shareholder value and shelf presence. And though I loved what I was doing, I had all but given up all of my independent artistic pursuits. So I'd stopped drawing, I'd stopped writing, I'd stopped playing my guitar, I put it under my bed, I stopped doing textiles. I'd been doing a lot of work in textiles at that point, or prior to that point. And so when I got this cold call from the Internet Radio Network, it was really more like, oh, this could be a fun creative outlet. This could be something that doesn't really have to do with business, but it can sort of be about business because it's on a Voice America Business Network, but I can make it all about the creative aspects of what I do. So it was sort of still in the wheelhouse of what I was doing professionally, but I could also nudge it ever so slightly away. And that's what I wanted to do. And I had never done anything like this before, but I was really that desperate to do some other creative endeavor that wasn't branding related. And so I started the radio show talking to my friends. It was very much designers talking to designers, what I would now call very inside baseball. And then it was only over the years that it evolved as I evolved, as I became more comfortable doing it. I did 100 episodes on Voice America, and then moved the show to Design Observer, Bill Drentel, the late great Bill Drentel, invited me to bring the podcast to Design Observer, but he did it with a proviso. I had to improve the sound quality because the sound quality of those early shows was just horrendous. I mean, truly horrendous. And he helped me find a producer, and I then started to podcast from the room that I'm talking to you in now, which is a little studio that was built for me at the School of Visual Arts, where I have my graduate program, where I run a graduate program in New York on branding. And so that's where I do my show. And I did that for 10 years. And then in 2019, moved the show to the TED Audio Collective and been part of their collective. I'm still doing the show independently. I'm still very much the owner of all the IP, but they've been incredible in helping me grow the show and expand my audience. So there was never any grand plan. There was never any big goal. There was never like, oh, I want to do this so that I do this. I want to do this so that one day I get to sit on the stage at the Brooklyn Academy of Music and interview Ai Weiwei, like I did last night. There was never, ever any of that type of possibility in my mind.
Yeah, and for some, I don't know, karma, for some reason you were lucky because you started shortly before then iTunes and the podcast, and then you started something that like you have also, like you were one of the first, so to say. So
I know, it was
and
completely by accident, Georgie, completely by accident.
yeah, my grandma always says that you have to work for your luck. So you were working and then the luck came to you. And another pivotal career, another pivotal moment for your career and your life, it's of course, I think, Sterling Brands, the agency that you were working the longest, more over 2 decades, where you were partner, where you did probably your bigger projects, such as Burger King, Identity, Star Wars, and so on and so on. And the moment you joined that company, were you already a name within the New York design community, or did you join on an earlier stage where you were talented but not still affirmed?
I don't think I had a name, no. I think that I was beginning to show signs of being successful in branding at the previous agency that I worked at, which when I started was called the Schechter Group and was acquired by Omnicom and then merged into Interbrand during my tenure there. When I got to the Schechter Group, I had been on a bit of a downward spiral with my career and had gone from being a designer to then an account manager. And by the time I got to the Schechter Group, I wasn't even an account director. I was somebody that was hired to bring in new business. And for me, it was as if I were falling down the ladder as opposed to climbing up. And I only took the job as what was then vice president of business development at the Schechter Group to be able to pay my mortgage. And I was not that excited about doing sales, but I knew how to do sales at previous design firms that I'd worked at because I was one of the owners of the design firm that I was at. And that was part of what we had to do. We had to bring in business to then make the work. And so I did know how to do it. What I didn't realize when I got there was how good I was going to be at it. And that was one of the big surprises of my life. And while I was there, I brought in a tremendous amount of business. It was almost as if I intrinsically understood branding, even though I had never had any education in branding either. And I think it was because of the way that I grew up, and my dad had a pharmacy for all of his life, all of his adult life. And I worked in it weekend after weekend after weekend. So I think I became very cognizant of what it meant to sell people things, to watch them choose things, to have that financial exchange. And I was able to bring all of that sort of nascent knowledge to what I was doing. But because it was so politically turbulent there, given the merge into Interbrand, it was just a nightmare being there. It was so backstabby and political, and I really hated it. And ultimately ended up going to Sterling at that time in 95. And ironically, Sterling was also acquired by Omnicom when I was there, but that was intentional. And my two partners and I intentionally were able to be acquired by Omnicom, which was a very different kind of situation than the one that I found myself in when I was at Schechter. I loved the work and I loved the people. I just didn't love the politics.
Yeah, it's a familiar feeling. And did you manage to create the right environment when you moved to Sterling? Like, was then this side part of the project, of the work that you didn't like, were you able to set the right culture and the right, I don't know, tone and spirit in the company?
That's a great question. I love these questions, Georgie. Thank you for making this so pleasurable. I didn't. My initial entry into Sterling was also fraught with difficulty. I started there in May of 1995, and the company had just come out of bankruptcy. They had been part of the Michael Peters Group, which had been a company that had come to the United States with great fanfare. They were a huge organization in the UK, and then they came to the United States. They opened an office in New York. They opened up an office in Minnesota, and they had an office in Canada. And they did very splashy, very big work for a long time, and then I guess fell on hard times. Simon Williams, the managing director of the New York office, ended up buying that office from Michael Peters when it went bankrupt for $1. So he was looking for somebody to come in and shake things up and bring in new business. I didn't quite understand all of the history when I went there, but I knew enough to know that I could potentially make an impact. And that's ultimately why I chose to go there. And when I got there, it was as if the stars aligned. Now, the first year was really hard because my job was business development. I came into an organization that was primarily white male, British white males, who thought that this colleague of theirs, this sort of loud American girl, was sort of a loud American girl. So they gave me a lot of grief. And they also had a very European design mentality. Now, the world has changed a lot since 1995. And I think that the United States design community, particularly the brand community, has learned a lot from the design aesthetic of the UK. But at the time, it was about as far from, the American design aesthetic was about as far from the European design aesthetic as it could be. And so literally I was winning projects with Tylenol and with Yoplait yogurt and with Hungry Jack and big American brands. And we were getting fired from everything because they didn't like the work. So what was the hardest part of doing this, which was acquiring the work I was doing, but then we were losing the work. And so at one point, after the 7th job we were fired from, I went to Simon Williams and I said, you know what, I can't do this with my career because I'm on the front lines and I'm definitely able to bring in the business and people are trusting me, but I'm abusing that trust by not being able to fulfill the work. So I'm not sure that this is the right fit for me. And it was really sad because I really, really enjoyed what I was doing and I enjoyed working with Simon, at which point he restructured the company and made me president so that I could then run the company and run the design work. And I was running the design division. There were 2 divisions, one a strategy, one a design. And so I took over the design division and then began to try to remake the design division in a way that I felt we'd be more suitable for the kind of work that our clients wanted at that time.
And one question that I would have about the design process, that I was thinking about it today actually, because I design buildings and I have to interact a lot with architects. And then through the podcast, I've interacted with many designers from different fields. And you have created designs that are consumed directly or indirectly by millions of people, because like Burger King or Star Wars are like very popular, or I'm sure all the like most of the projects, Tropicana, I've worked with Pepsi, as I know. Um, who do you design for? Because you have to convince the bosses of those big corporations that there's the right design, but you also have to, you know, bring together so many people to enjoy this design, because you have to convince me, which I'm a designer, and maybe convince my mother, who is not a designer but likes something completely different. So how do you approach, who do you design for? How do you approach these projects?
Well, very carefully. And not only do we have to please the people that you just mentioned, we also have to please the internal people that work at the corporation. So, you know, Paula Scher has said, we brand agencies don't get the big bucks to do the big projects. We get the big bucks to navigate through the big politics that occur when you do these big projects. And so it's very, very challenging. I mean, we at Sterling were at the forefront back in the 90s and into the aughts with qualitative pre-design testing. And so we would create a lot of diagnostic and projective work that we would take to research. So we would really get very involved in understanding a brand's inherent equity before we did any design work at all. And now everybody does that. But at the time, it was a really, really unique tool to be able to leverage a brand's inherent equity, understand how far you could push that, and how you could begin to evolve the overall stature of a brand without losing its inherent integrity, so that it felt natural as an evolution. But we also spent a lot of time talking internally to our clients about, why did you need to make this change, which is something I think everybody needs to think about. If you're making a change for internal reasons, its chances are not going to make sense to the external audience, your consumers. And so part of, I think, any successful branding program now needs to have an external launch strategy. So how are we going to explain this change to consumers? Consumers don't go to a shelf or a fast food restaurant or a drugstore and think, "Ooh, look at that. Taco Bell has changed." You know, they look at this and think, why is it different? Am I going to have a different experience? Is the taste going to be different? Am I going to be having to pay more for less? Are they trying to trick me into believing something? Because we don't know, consumers don't know why something is changing. People, because of the way our brains work and the reptilian brain, which we really have zero control over, it controls all of our involuntary activity. We perceive the unknown, uncertainty, unpredictability with vulnerability. And so anything that sort of signals those alarms in our brain, we feel apprehension around. And so we have to, as designers and strategists, be able to create a way for consumers, for people, to understand why we're doing these things. And if the reason is because a brand manager wants to make a mark on the brand, it's not a good enough reason anymore.
That's a very good answer. But you've done also a lot of, so to say, not directly brand related works. For example, you've promoted, tell me if I'm wrong, you've helped promoting the TheMeToo movement, if I'm not wrong.
Well, it's not quite I mean, yes, I think
the hat,
it's
like the whole thing that
no,
became a
no,
symbol.
I didn't do anything with that at all.
Okay.
I mean, that's Janice Wyman, and she's amazing. And Tarana Burke is Me Too, and she's amazing. My work has been in alignment with that work. And
yes,
I definitely would say I support it sort of emotionally, but I didn't have anything to do with contributing to its popularity and its need. I've worked for 10 years to try to help eradicate sexual violence through work I've done with the No More Foundation and now with the Joyful Heart Foundation. The No More Foundation is a consortium of organizations that have all come together to help raise money to eradicate sexual violence. And that included Avon and Kimberly Clark and Verizon. And where I first became aware of the Joyful Heart Foundation, that organization was part of it as well. And I worked with Christine Mao to create the No More Mark, which is the blue circle device, and also the strategy and positioning for the movement. And through that experience, I met Mariska Hargitay, who is the star of Law and Order SVU. And she and the then executive director of the organization asked me to help them with their identity and positioning. And when that was completed, I was asked to join the board and have been on the board of the Joyful Hearts Foundation for the last 5 years. And our goal is to eradicate sexual violence, domestic abuse, child abuse, and assault, any kind of sexual assault. And one of the main focuses of our work now is to eradicate the rape kit backlog, which exists in the United States.
Yeah, that I think it's a very noble way to put your talent on at work. I think probably it's way more satisfying to work on something that makes you feel bigger than yourself and that helps other, and it's sort of you personally connected to the topic. So I can only imagine how wonderful it is to sort of put on your superpower in understanding people for a great cause. And one thing that I really think it's interesting of your story, this is what I said in the beginning, you're such a big personality, because I didn't know much about you at the beginning. I found about you for the first time 1.5 years ago when I started the podcast, and I was like Googling who are the best podcaster in the design field who I need to compete with. So no, and so since then I have got to know more about your work and your story. And the one interesting part of your story is when you were trying to join the AIGA,
Yes.
and I was thinking that's such a very positive and a little bit naive way. How did you approach an academical world, probably which back then was way more closer than it's now, as somebody coming from the corporate world, and also you had a little bit speak up, FOD. Thinking, weren't you happy about that? Because that meant you were divisive. If you were pissing somebody so much off, probably you were like a divisive figure, which is always good.
Well, it is if you want to be. I didn't want to be a divisive figure. I wanted to be liked. So I had a really hard time with all of that because I thought that I was being judged unfairly for somebody that I wasn't. Being called a she-devil is not a goal in life for me. And that was really hard. But ultimately that experience really did change the course of my life in a profound way. I mean, not only are Armin Vid and Bryony Gomez Palacio, the founders of Speak Up, people that I consider part of my family now. I also feel that that is a real line in the sand with the direction of my career. There's everything that happened before the Speak Up article in 2003 and everything that happened after. And everything that happened after was profoundly better.
But why were they defining you as the she-devil? I was very curious about this because, I mean, at least, and unless you didn't change radically since then, because I mean, right now, we contacted you and you were super friendly and you were so open. How did they? Why did they perceive you as a she-devil? Like you don't have this kind of aura when people interact with you, like, or even when you speak.
Well, I think that at the time, branding was considered a different discipline than it is now. I think it was considered a bit more like the devil's work and too commercial for what was seen as and talked about on that particular blog post as the precious design world. And so designers just didn't respect doing mass market packaging and fast food logos and over the counter pharmaceuticals and the things that I was doing every day. And so they looked down on what I was doing. And because I was being included as a judge in one of the most prestigious design organizations competitions, AIGA, the Professional Association for Design, they felt that that meant that AIGA was listening to corporate clowns and conspiring with me to bring down the design industry, or that I was somehow using my position to bring down the design community. And that was really hurtful because that wasn't the case at all. In fact, I was given the opportunity to be a judge for AIGA's annual competition as a bit of a consolation prize because I had been kind of kicked to the curb in a special interest group that I'd been part of on branding. And they felt at the time that I didn't deserve to be on the board because my work was too traditional. So it was kind of a clusterfuck that I was being criticized for being in cahoots with the AIGA when in fact it was the opposite. So through that experience, because I knew the AIGA people weren't happy with me and now the sort of anti-AIGA people were unhappy with me, I kind of felt like the most hated woman in the US design scene. And it was really, really hard.
I think it's yeah, it's a very interesting situation to be in, but I don't know. I still from the I don't know, maybe today it's really changed the culture where if you devise, if it's somehow also a popularity, I don't know, maybe back then agreement was a little bit better accepted. And like in the beginning, you have done so much and you do so much. You've done design, branding, you write books, magazines, podcasting. You have a private life. How did the life of Debbie Millman look along the way to develop all these skills and all these activities you do? Like, I we may say, like, I don't know, did you even have time to sleep to in order to do all this stuff at such high level? And how does it look like nowadays? Are you now more settled or you're still so active?
What's a good question, Georgie? First of all, I do sleep. I kind of consider myself a sleepaholic. I really need a lot of sleep. And my preference is to get at least 8 hours, although lately I've been getting less just because I was supposedly in book launch mode this last couple of weeks. And so I had already made a lot of commitments to talk to folks and participate in events that are still wonderful and fun to do, but I probably wouldn't have done quite as many if I wasn't trying to get the word out about my book. So I've been getting less sleep than usual, but I will make up for it, I promise. So I do think actually that getting enough sleep is what helps fuel my energy because when you sleep, you regenerate your cells, you rebuild your brain. And so I think that that's super important for anybody that wants to try to make the most of their creativity. I think a lot of what drives me or has driven me in the past is a need to feel worthy, a need to feel like I deserve to be alive. And, I did have a really traumatic childhood. So I think it's taken me decades to feel that I can try to get what I want or have what I want. And it's still been a lot harder than I would have liked, but I'm now at a point where I am being offered opportunities that I've been dreaming about my whole life. So I do feel like the work was worth it. And now want to make the most of those opportunities.
One thing that you have said a lot of times is that you want to be constantly peaking until the end of your life.
Yes.
And a person that's so, um, I like to say, not successful, but fulfilled, because it's the right word, in my opinion, rather than successful. How do you keep yourself with this sense of urgency of, making something new instead of settling down? Because it's, I don't know, for the common people, it's maybe very easy to be a little bit more relaxed after only achieving maybe one of the things that you have achieved. So is it within you, or do you really keep a check on you to be always so with this sense of urgency of doing better?
I don't know that it's conscious, Georgie. I can't say that, I wake up every day and think, okay, what am I going to do today? Like that's really not it.
Mm.
It's a matter of always having wanted to do a lot of different things, for a very long time struggled to do a lot of different things, was rejected from a lot of different things. And then now in my sort of middle age, being given an opportunity to do so many of those things that I worked so hard for to do, now I want to do them. so I think a lot of it is that. I'm not a big relaxer in that way. I always like to be thinking about things or making things or doing things. Like, my idea of relaxing is working in my garden, which is actually a lot of work, but I love doing it and it's really enjoyable to me. Although now that I do have a bit of a personal life, now that I'm married, I do love to spend time with my wife, just doing whatever, having dinner, watching television together, talking, reading together. Like, that's some of my favorite time.
And that's also a way of picking in a different field, picking in a personal life, which is also, part of our life, which is important. And one of your early year issues or worries was your financial independence or freedom or financial, security.
It's really security,
Yes.
yeah.
Was there a moment that was kind of like secured, and then you got a little bit more free to really be more creative? A lot of people say like there is some pivoting point where, okay, now I'm good with money. Like I really am sure that cannot, go so bad. Was there a
Yeah,
moment
I
like that?
mean, the thing about equating freedom with financial security is a little bit fraught as well, because for me, my urgency to be financially secure came from a deep need to be self-sufficient and to be safe, so that I would be secure in my own home, that no one could take away from me, that no one can hurt me in, et cetera, et cetera. But the problem with equating financial success with security is that, for whatever reason, we equate the two, or I did. And if you don't feel safe in yourself, really no amount of external validation, whether it be financial, whether it be professional success, whether it be love, those things don't fill up that profound trauma to give you a sense of ease with whatever it is you have. It helps, but it doesn't eliminate it. And so over the years, one of the things that I've worked on in therapy is, how do I get to that self-reliance, that sense that I'm okay as is, that I don't need the external validation, that I don't need a certain amount of money to feel secure. Because if you use that as a benchmark, as soon as you reach that mark, you raise the bench so that you can still continue to try to feel the feeling that you're never going to fulfill with these things that you're trying to get. However, all that being said, I did sell a company in 2008 to the second largest advertising and communications holding company in the world. That did give me a really profound foundation to be able to start to feel as if I could have a lot more opportunities to be less financially oriented. But it didn't help me so much that I just said, okay, bye. I sold the company in 2008, but I didn't leave until 2016. And a lot of people were questioning whether or not I was ever really going to do that. I had talked about doing it for so long. I said after we sold the company, I was going to begin to plan my exit strategy, to a point where no one in my family ever thought I was going to. It was like, yeah, Debbie says she's going to leave, but she's never going to leave. And then by 2015, I really had begun to put into motion the idea of really doing it, and then was offered the CEO position by Simon Williams, the man that had hired me back in 2005, who was the CEO. He was going to evolve to a chairman position and offered me the CEO position. And I was like, that scene in The Godfather 3 when Michael Corleone's like, just when I thought I could get out, they pull me back in. And it was the same thing. I was like, what? I was just really at the place where I felt like I could plan my exit strategy with a lot of, integrity and time and whatnot. Now I'm being given this sort of an opportunity of a lifetime, a woman CEO of a major public company. It just felt like I owed it to myself and every other professional woman out there to do this. And then ultimately I decided to say no, which was one of the biggest, hardest decisions of my life. But man, am I glad I did that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes happiness and fulfillment is not where we are supposed to be, but where we feel like being. So it's a very personal. That's why I don't like the word success, because success, you just have a perception of that, and not that's why I like to ask these questions that are more interactive between private life and public, or so that people get a feeling about what it's all about all around that person. And what is the main activity that you have today? Like, what is when you wake up in the morning, what is the office you head to, or what is the main activity you're dedicated right now?
Well, I do a couple of different things now. I run the branding program at the School of Visual Arts, which is where I am right now, talking to you in my studio where I record my podcast. I also do that here. So a couple of different activities occur here. And I also am one of the editorial directors at print.com, as you mentioned. So I do 3 different things for print every week. I host my podcast there. I write a column called Dear Design Martyrs, which is an advice column about trying to make it in design. And I have another column called What Matters. And that is an ongoing exercise that I have been working on via a questionnaire that I send to people, really probing as to what matters in their life. So I do those 3 things on a regular basis. And I have my book coming out in February, so I've been working really hard on that. And trying to think of other things that I'm doing. I think that's it.
Yeah, I think that's enough on your plate. And this podcast, which is now ongoing for such a long time, and you, of course, as like, it's different than this one because you can be on a eye level with so many amazing creatives. That how has that influenced your own creativity? Have you gotten a lot of education and inspiration through it? And have you do you think the podcast also contributed to build this sort of community of design that is sort of a, like, did it create also sort of a circle of creatives, because you start with your friends, and a lot of the creatives you interview there in New York, so it feels like the great Gatsby design community.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, I don't really become friends with a lot of people that I interview. I interviewed my friends in the early days and still will interview a whole bunch of them if they're doing really cool things that I want to help promote. I just interviewed a whole bunch of my friends on this season's episodes. Lissa Cohn, who has a remarkable book out on leadership from startup to grown up. And it's really great. Dory Clark, who has The Long Game, just came out. Adam J. Kurtz has a book about sort of self-realization. And I think that's a remarkable book. So if my friends are having things that I really think are beautiful and important, of course, I'll interview them. But I also interview performers and musicians and writers and people that don't necessarily have a lead gene that would include design from a very low altitude look at what design is, but from a high altitude look, I think it's very much including design, because I think that design is about intention, and design is about making decisions about how you want to be, live, work, and everything. It has to be designed. Every experience has to be designed. Everything that we choose to include in our lives has been designed. And so I believe that decisions in many ways are designed. And so that's what I like to talk about.
Yeah. And I think I could be talking to you forever, but of course we have a limited time, because also your schedule is listening can think about. I want to conclude with one, I think, perfect way to this conversation. When you were at the Tim Ferriss show, you ended up explaining an exercise you ask your students to do, which is writing an essay of their ideal day in 10 years from now. And I wanted to ask you, is your day to as maybe one of your essays that you have written 10 years ago, or is it even better?
Georgi, I love this question. Thank you. It's way better. And it includes just about everything that I wrote about back in 2005 when I first did the exercise. So it's a powerful and magical little exercise that I highly, highly, highly recommend. I'd love to come back on the show and talk to you about a project that I'm doing around this 10-year plan when I launch it.
Debbie, all our guests are always welcome back. I always say to everyone, this is the first time, but doesn't have to be the last time. And you're always welcome. And I would be happy to have you on for more of these super insightful and open conversations. And thank you very much one more time for giving us a little bit of your daily schedule.
Thank you. It has been an absolute honor to participate in your podcast. And I just want to tell you that I've really, really enjoyed our conversation, and you're a great interviewer. Thank you.
Thank you. And last but not least, people stay tuned, because the Why Design Matters book is on the way in February. It will be maybe a very good St. Valentine's Day gift, or for just a New Year's Eve, or just a thought for a friend or a girlfriend or whatever partner. Okay, thank you.
Bye.
Bye, Debbie.